In the cold, fog-soaked dawn of October 24, 1917, the mountains of the Julian Alps felt unusually silent. So silent that even seasoned Italian sentries sensed something was wrong. For 2 long years the front had barely moved, trenches carved into stone, men exhausted by 11 massive battles along the Isonzo River. Italy was stretched thin, worn down, and waiting for an attack they no longer believed would come. But across the lines, hidden by darkness and shifting mist, the Central Powers were preparing a strike unlike anything the Italian front had seen before. Germany and Austria Hungary knew the clock was ticking. The United States had entered the war, and soon the Allies would flood the Western Front with fresh manpower. Austria Hungary was starving, its morale crumbling, its empire cracking at the edges. But there was one small window of hope. Russia was collapsing in revolution. For the first time since 1914, German divisions were suddenly free to move elsewhere. And Berlin had made its decision. Those divisions would move to Italy. The goal was not simply to win a battle. It was to break the Italian army completely. The new 14th Army, formed from elite stormtrooper units and the best Austro-Hungarian formations, gathered near the village of Caporetto. Among its ranks was a young lieutenant named Erwin Rommel, a man whose instincts and daring would soon become legendary. But here in 1917, he was just another mountain officer carrying out orders that would plunge the Italian front into chaos. The plan for the offensive was bold. No long artillery preparation, no predictable mass attack. Instead, the Central Powers would use speed, infiltration, and surprise. Small assault teams would move through weak points in the Italian defenses, bypass strongholds, climb ridges no one expected them to climb, and appear suddenly behind enemy trenches. Communication would collapse, command would break, and the entire front would fold inward. As midnight passed on October 24, the fog thickened until even nearby trees vanished. Italian troops could barely see a few meters in front of them. A few officers complained that the trenches smelled faintly of gas drifting in the wind, but most believed it was just the damp climate of the mountains. It wasn't. At exactly 2 a.m., German and Austro-Hungarian artillery opened fire, not with a massive hours-long barrage, but with a short, violent, carefully targeted strike. Gas shells, smoke shells, and high explosives burst across the line, designed not to destroy, but to confuse, isolate, and blind. Italian soldiers scrambled to put on gas masks, only to be hit minutes later by a second wave of shells containing irritants that forced many to remove them. Panic spread along the trenches, runners went missing, telephone lines were cut, the fog swallowed everything. And then, the infantry came. Not in straight, predictable lines, but in scattered, fast-moving groups. On narrow paths, through ravines, across steep slopes, German stormtroopers advanced quickly and silently. Austro-Hungarian units climbed terrain the Italians believed impossible to scale. Within minutes, several strongpoints found themselves surrounded from directions they never prepared to defend. Italian commanders tried desperately to understand the situation, but every report contradicted the last. Some officers insisted the attack was local. Others claimed entire regiments had disappeared. The truth was worse. The Italian line wasn't broken in one place, it was breaking everywhere, all at once. Rommel and his Württemberg Mountain Battalion moved with remarkable speed. Where most troops needed hours to climb certain ridges, Rommel pushed his men to reach them in minutes. At one position near Monte Matajur, he bypassed heavy Italian defenses and approached from above, a direction no Italian soldier believed an enemy could come from. Rommel later wrote that when he shouted for the Italians to surrender, dozens of helmets lifted in shock. Surrounded and helpless, an entire position gave up without a single shot. Similar scenes unfolded across the front. Some Italian units fought fiercely, but others, disoriented and cut off, were overwhelmed. Many soldiers had been pushed to the limit after months of harsh discipline under General Cadorna. Their morale was fragile, and when surprise struck, it broke. Columns of Italian troops began falling back toward the Isonzo River. Some did so in orderly lines, others in scattered groups. Supply wagons jammed the narrow mountain roads, guns were abandoned when horses collapsed, and refugees mixed with retreating battalions. By midday, it became clear that Caporetto was no ordinary battle. It was a disaster, unfolding in real time. Cadorna, far from the front, refused to believe what he heard. Hours passed before he accepted reports that entire sectors had vanished. Even then, instead of adjusting strategy or rebuilding morale, he blamed his own soldiers for cowardice. His message, sent across the army, deepened the collapse. Meanwhile, Central Powers units surged forward. Their speed was astonishing. In a single day, they advanced farther than most World War I offensives achieved in weeks. By nightfall on October 24th, the Italians had lost Caporetto, and the retreat was only begun. The mountains echoed with footsteps, shouted orders, rumbling wagons, and the far-off thunder of advancing artillery. The fog that hid the attack now hid the retreat. Caporetto was becoming one of the most dramatic collapses of the entire First World War.
The disaster at Caporetto on October 24th was only the beginning. The greatest enemy the retreating Italian army now faced was not the German stormtrooper, but the very geography that had defined the front for years. The Julian Alps are a labyrinth of steep, narrow valleys, and all roads led back to the few critical crossing points over the Isonzo and Tagliamento rivers. General Cadorna's refusal to build proper supply lines or plan for a retreat meant that all available infrastructure instantly collapsed under the weight of the panic. Artillery pieces, thousands of them, were caught in traffic jams on mountain roads already choked with supply trucks, ambulances, and retreating infantry. The men abandoned the heavy guns rather than let them fall into enemy hands, destroying their mechanisms and leaving behind enough firepower to equip several German divisions. The Central Powers did not just capture a line, they captured the enormous industrial output of the Italian war effort. The sheer number of lost guns and materiel would haunt Italy for the remainder of the war, forcing them to rely even more heavily on Allied imports. The sight of these abandoned weapons, silent and useless, was a crushing symbol of the failure of the High Command. But the speed of the pursuit was unprecedented. Romo's battalion and others like it continued their deep infiltration, covering terrain so quickly that they repeatedly cut off entire Italian armies attempting an orderly withdrawal. The traditional front line was gone. The battle was now a race against time and geography. The Central Powers' immediate objective was to cross the wide, fast-flowing Tagliamento River before the Italians could establish a new defensive perimeter. The fate of the entire Italian peninsula hinged on that river crossing. As the retreat accelerated, the command structure dissolved. General Cadorna, having blamed his troops, finally issued an order for a full withdrawal across the Tagliamento, but his methods were brutal. When a regiment hesitated or fell out of line, Cadorna ordered them summarily executed for desertion, often without trial. It is estimated that thousands of soldiers fell victim to this draconian system. This ruthless discipline failed to inspire, and instead fueled the chaos, as commanders prioritized survival over blind obedience. The deep distrust between the officers and the common soldiers, already a major issue, reached its breaking point, severely damaging unit cohesion when it was needed most. The retreat became a mass migration. Civilian refugees, terrified of the advancing Central Powers, poured onto the roads, mixing with the soldiers. Women, children, and old men hurried past exhausted troops, often carrying only small bundles of possessions. This mixing of military and civilian traffic further slowed the process, creating a humanitarian crisis as food and shelter quickly became scarce. The road from Udine to the Tagliamento became a single, desperate river of humanity, a scene of unprecedented despair that stretched for miles. The entire northern province was emptying out, moving south toward safety. Amidst the chaos, moments of profound sacrifice began to appear. A small group of battalion units managed to hold critical bridgeheads on the Tagliamento. These rearguard actions, led by junior commanders who wisely ignored Cadorna's toxic orders, fought with sudden, desperate determination. They were fighting not for a distant general, but for their comrades, their families, and their homeland, buying precious days for the bulk of the army to cross the river. Their disciplined, lethal defense in the face of overwhelming odds was the first sign that the Italian spirit was not entirely broken. They understood that every minute gained meant thousands of lives saved. By the time the main Central Powers forces reached the Tagliamento, heavy rains had swollen the river into a roaring torrent. The Italian rearguard blew the bridges, and the river itself became a natural defensive line. The pursuit, which had been gaining momentum, was finally slowed. The German and Austro-Hungarian forces paused, knowing that crossing the Tagliamento at full flood would be suicidal. This temporary reprieve granted by nature and the bravery of the rearguard proved to be the pivotal moment. The entire Caporetto operation lasted only 2 weeks, but its scale was staggering. Italy lost over 300,000 men, captured, killed, or wounded, and suffered the loss of 2,500 artillery pieces and vast quantities of supplies. The Central Powers had advanced almost 100 miles, or 160 kilometers, smashing through the hard-won gains of 2 years. The catastrophe was a national trauma, shaking the foundations of the Italian state and its monarchy. The catastrophe forced a massive political and military reckoning in Italy. The depth of the failure could not be hidden. In Rome, public opinion turned decisively against Cadorna. He was finally dismissed, replaced by the far more empathetic and strategically minded General Armando Diaz. Diaz immediately changed the tone of command, focusing not on discipline, but on the morale of the fighting men. He promised better food, better pay, and fairer treatment, launching a massive propaganda campaign that re-centered the soldier as a hero, not a coward. For the first time, the Italian soldier felt valued. Crucially, Caporetto brought the Allies to Italy's aid. French and British divisions, rushed down from the Western Front, began arriving to reinforce the shattered Italian lines. This was the first time Italy had received large-scale foreign assistance, a symbolic and material shift that transformed the war effort. The combined presence of Allied troops lifted morale and guaranteed that the Central Powers would face a unified, stronger defense. The new defensive line was established on the Piave River, a much shorter and more defensible position than the sprawling mountain fronts. The retreat ended just miles from Venice itself. The Italian government rallied the nation around the slogan Tutti al Piave, or Everyone to the Piave, a desperate call to arms that resonated across the country, uniting factory workers, farmers, and soldiers. By early November 1917, the Central Powers, exhausted by their unprecedented advance and stretched thin across the new territory, launched their final push across the Piave. But here, the spirit of the Italian army was reborn. The soldiers fought with renewed ferocity, a determined final stand to save their nation and their families. The tide had turned, not by victory, but by sheer survival. The battle that began as a total collapse at Caporetto had become the defense of the Piave, and the new Italian army, battered but unbroken, held line.